I think one of the big challenges is that, there is, for example, infrastructure investment that needs to happen in the Solomon Islands. And largely, China has been providing that. Recently, they said they're going to help expand the largest hospital in the Solomon Islands. Where should alternative sources of money come in? Because if there is no alternative to China, China is just going to be the only game in town.
Right. So, so far, it's been all infrastructure for Chinese. I know that they have supported some of the agriculture things with the Ministry of Agriculture. But how do you see, in the context of Solomon Islanders, we have been seeing hospitals, schools, and all that, which are very important for our lives. But there's an aspect of the life of common people in Solomon that has not been addressed. The economic empowerment of people. How could this be helped? And I see the modality that the Americans are using are quite useful by way of using their private enterprises to establish in a transparent way within society and have that discussion with them so that we establish something that for the ordinary Solomon can see that this is something that will help my life, improve my life, rather than infrastructures that are huge and big, are centralized in Honiara and has no direct or day-to-day meaning to the lives of the ordinary people. We have, of course, hospitals and all that, which is good, but it has to be balanced out as well, I think, with the economies of the country, the people, so that when these things are up and running, the economy is able to sustain the standard that people expect those entities to deliver. At the moment, we can build infrastructure, hospitals and all that, but will they be long-lasting in terms of the services expected of them? How that would happen? How will that happen if the economic aspect of the country and that belongs to the people because people own the resources in this country, the land, the tribal people. So there has to be that interaction with the tribes, the ordinary people, to ensure that their resources are meaningfully, dealt with, invested in, so that it affects them and affects the way they make decisions. At the moment, they are at the receiving end. And if I may a little bit add on, there's a scheme at the national level they call the Rural Constituency Development Fund, administered by a ministry within the government system. And what this scheme is doing is empowering members of parliament to give things to their constituency. And most of things that they have given are materials, copper and iron roofing and all that, which, again, when you talk about the economies of the people, I think that's not, you would hardly see that happening other than the materials that belongs to the Chinese people in Honiara, Chinese owned and run outlets that have been purchased with, finances from the Solomons in terms of their taxes that are now being put into the budget of the government and that are used by the politicians to pay these things. So I think if you look at that scheme, there is nothing for the ordinary people in Solomons.
So, if Malaita Province had, let's say, $100 million to use for what you call real economic empowerment of people, what would that look like on the ground that's different from the kind of building infrastructure projects that we're seeing from Chinese money?
So if you are a Solomon Islander, the first place you would run to when you're in trouble is your tribe. That's where your security is. You have land, you have people, you have relationships there. So that's the entity that we need. I mean, in the case of Malaita, we are encouraging that. It has been somehow people have seen these tribal people who own land and resources as anti-development because the way they interact with, the machinery of the government. But that shouldn't be it. We need to innovate. There is need for innovation. That how could we make this entity that is rightly belongs to the people to be a useful tool so that we can engage in terms of investment. So that's what Malaita is trying to do under the scale program that I've mentioned under USAID, to see how can ordinary people that their wealth, their common wealth is in their land, in their trees, in their people. And that belongs to the tribes. And we shouldn't see tribe as an anti-development entity. It is the entity that made out of Solomon Islands. there hasn't been any proper discussions of how do we make this thing with the people, ensuring that if we are to capitalize in investment in this entity, we need to see it being done properly, transparently, and accountability. Because what we have seen in the forestry sector is they made the rules and laws at the national level, then allow those spaces to be occupied or to be used by individuals from this tribal group, and they have caused social disconnections with the people base. There hasn't been any proper conversation at that level to allow that, okay, if these things happen within our common resource, this is how it should happen. So I think that's the idea that Malaita Province, under what is called a restorative economy policy, is driving at, to see how could capitalism as a model could be captured under the common resource of the tribal people and used for the common good of the people, rather than having individuals who opted to use loopholes with the system to please themselves with common resources.
There's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, it needs a lot more than just money. It needs a recognition of the tribes and other local leaders and kind of allowing them to actually be involved in that decision-making process. But
China's not going to like that.
China is the like the Communist Party is the opposite, right? They're a centralized power where the central government tells everyone what to do at every level, and you have to do it exactly their way. And they have no interest in having any other power, right? Because that undermines their own authority.
And it really makes it clear why the atheism of the Chinese Communist Party was such an issue. Like that's not, they're officially atheists. That's what they push. It's not like an issue. They do not have freedom of religion in China. And so these, traditional tribes, like that's just so antithetical to the Chinese Communist Party.
Right. It's like any group or organization or belief system that's outside of that is a threat. And, but yeah, so, I mean, I think that's really interesting what you're saying about that being the road to economic empowerment and development, is looking at these local tribes or communities. But to do that, you need China out of the picture.
Yeah. So the one thing, for example, terminologies in the Solomons played a lot of, misinformation, if I can put that way. Terminology such as communities. If you use communities and you drive your development agenda through communities own nothing. It's the tribes. It's the people who own these things. So you have to drive your conversation that has meaning into these people, rather than using some artificial setups and that this is it. I think it's an intriguing, it's a, like I say, this place in the Solomons, if you study it properly, it's a very diverse place. And like you rightly said, diversity, if you control diversity, then there would be definitely confrontation. Because that diversity means allowing people to do things in their ways that are all good for us. But if you like, as we know, if China, for that matter, who is a centralized sort of system, it will definitely go against, the realities of our society here in the Solomons, that we are a people who have control of our small things in our small spaces. And if you decided to put us together and do away with those relationships, it will be very challenging and it will affect people.